Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Can We Have Your Attention, the podcast all about the attention economy, with myself and with Claire, the founder of the Attention Practice. Hi, Claire.
Hi, James.
So, Claire...
Who's yourself, by the way?
I'm a broadcaster, a journalist. I'm the founder of Phonogram. I don't know what else to say at this point.
And your name is James Wickham.
It is. I do lots of stuff. Thank you for that. So let's start then today, I think, for episode 3, because we want to do a mixture of things, don't we, as part of this. We want to do various guests, which we're hoping to do over the next few episodes. We did say in the last episode that we wanted to do something today about why you're so tired all the time.
We did.
We're going to postpone that slightly. We are making a production change, everybody. And instead, we're going to do something a bit topical because something has happened which got your attention, which got my attention, and we think it's really important to talk about for attention. And that is something that has happened down under. And no, it's not the Ashes, despite the fact that I have a campaign on to talk only about cricket on everything I dare to do.
I am barely aware that that's happening. Yeah, I'm only aware because of the Today programme.
Okay. What's the Today programme? No, never mind. Let's just, by the way, just as a slight aside, whenever the Today programme people used to ring up my desk at work when I used to work for the BBC and would ask for something, I would always call it the Today Show because they got really annoyed. Thought you'd enjoy that. So let's talk, shall we, a bit today about something topical, which is this social media ban that's coming in Australia for under 16s. It's really interesting.
It is really interesting. So from December 10th, for anyone who isn't aware, Australia is bringing into effect a law that will effectively ban most of the major social media platforms for young people under the age of 16. So they will go through age verification processes. There's already some speculation that kids are going to figure out a way around this. There's some kids I heard today on the Today program saying things like, well, their mom set up their account and it's their mom's details anyway because they had it underage when they shouldn't have. So, how are they going to really be able to tell this is an account for kids? Interesting challenge anyway, but there's some other exceptions to that rule as well. So the law itself, it doesn't cover YouTube, it doesn't cover messaging apps like WhatsApp, and it also doesn't cover gaming. So I think Twitch in particular or anything related to that.
One of the things that my niece and nephews are kind of obsessed with is Roblox.
Oh, yeah.
Is that included? Because there's all sorts of stories around that.
No, it's not. Well. Not at all. Minecraft, right. Roblox, Fortnite, or anything like it. So my nephew is a gamer as well. He's beta testing tool because he's very cool. He is actually genuinely very cool. But he and his friends, they meet, and particularly in VR, and game that way together. And it's not just the gaming itself. It's a way for them to be together when they really can't, right? Like a lot of kids today, it's not like you and I, when we were younger, we were allowed a lot more freedom, I think. We often lived close to city centers or to high streets and could easily go and see our friends. Kids today do seem to have more restrictions on them. They aren't given that level of freedom. And when this is the age where you're supposed to be developing those relationships, you do end up a little bit trapped. Where is your outlet for seeing that? Well, it's, gaming.
Yeah, it's online, it's Roblox, it's Minecraft, it's Fortnite, it's all of those things. Yeah, absolutely. So what do we make of this ban? Do we think this ban is a good idea and will it help children's attention spans?
So I think that is a subject of incredible debate. So generally speaking, I'm pulling up a book here, Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. He is probably the biggest advocate for this, or certainly the most famous advocate for it. His argument is that exposure to social media below the age of 16 is rewiring kids' brains. It's rewiring their attachment skills, their relationships, and then also their sense of well-being. It's increasing levels of mental health conditions, anxiety, depression, all of that he believes is linked to the use of social media specifically. So he does advocate for this quite a lot. I think there's some contentiousness with that. There are other people who push back and say, well, is it new or is it that we're more aware? Is it new or is it that you have parents who grew up in a generation? We're the age of a lot of teenagers' parents, or we're approaching that age at least. Yeah. And, we are the Prozac generation, right? So, there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing here going on. But certainly, there's some evidence of that. And it seems like in the Australian law, Anthony Albanese talked about, the Prime Minister he talked about wanting to get children back on football pitches, right? Get them back outside playing. Well, I don't really know how you do that unless you have other measures in place that encourage that, right? Specifically. So whether it's creating more spaces for kids to play, whether it's, giving parents the tools or skills to encourage them to get their kids outdoors, right? And no one's banning phones specifically here, so maybe that helps. But I also am thinking a lot about my favorite book. My favorite book.
Yes.
This is a book called Queen Bees and Wannabes. We'll put it in the show notes. Rosalind Wiseman. So this book is actually the source material for Mean Girls, the film. This is a parenting book from the 90s for parents of teenage girls, right? And
full disclosure, I've never seen this film or read that book. I don't know how
you've not seen this film.
I'm culturally unaware. I've no idea.
It's 21 years old.
I know. I don't.
It's a legal drinking age adult in the U.S. age.
Honestly, I don't watch any films. I think all films stopped with Airplane and Blazing Saddles in the 1970s. I mean, the greatest films of all time. And after that, who cares? Right?
Okay, I'm not going to dispute Blazing Saddles.
Anyway, I think we've gone off.
Well,
we've gone off tangent.
I once made my entire team of 30 people watch Mean Girls and I stand by this. I will go to my grave saying this. It is the best depiction of power dynamics our culture has. Like, if you ever want to understand power dynamics, Mean Girls.
That's quite a claim, but okay,
yeah,
good.
Anyone can come fight me on that one.
I know what my homework is once the Ashes is over.
Thank you. You'll love it. There's no one who doesn't like them. Okay, anyway.
Good.
So that book talks extensively, and this is in the 90s, about the kinds of challenges in building friendships and building relationships that, create anxiety and create depression in teenage girls. So obviously this isn't new, right?
Mm.
Like, this is not a new phenomenon. It's just through a different channel. But that channel is definitely programmed to hold your attention, to maintain it, and to bombard you with things that give you a heightened sense of either fear or laughter. It basically keeps your adrenaline going, and deliberately designed that way too. There's some links we'll put in the show notes, but there's evidence going back to 2011 to 2014 that shows that, from Dr. Karen Nelson Field, that shows that the responses in social media are more likely to be triggered by extreme reactions, extreme emotions. And as these platforms have prioritized engagement in the building of their algorithms, you can see that it then prioritizes content that's highly sensationalized, highly reactive. And that, a constant stream of that, even if it's for, I'm looking at my notes here that says kids 8 to 14 spend an average of 2 hours and 59 minutes per day, I think, online.
Wow.
We'll double check
that's
that.
Quite a
That's actually quite a lot.
lot.
I'm gonna double check that figure. But of that time that they spend on there, a lot of that is spent on social media and on platforms that are then prioritizing these like highly, highly, highly stimulated emotions, which will connect back to your feeling of well-being.
So Australia bringing this in, I think, is particularly interesting because in Britain, one of the reasons that I think a lot of people feel that people don't play as much as they used to, children don't play as much, is because of a lack of available space.
Yeah.
There aren't the playing fields that there used to be, for example.
Yeah.
That's not really the same problem in Australia, is it? Because it's a big place.
It's a big place. And I think one of the things that we don't really talk about in conjunction with these sorts of rules is the rise of helicopter parenting. So
can you explain that?
Can I explain what helicopter parenting is? Where parents feel much, much, much more protective of their children, and so are much more likely to restrict their ability to roam compared to previous generations. I worked on, something a few years ago for a food brand, and, this came up in the course of that research. And I found it quite funny because the people my age who were the subjects of the research, they regarded themselves as the last generation that was allowed to roam free. But I believe the term helicopter parenting came into effect for our generation to describe the fact that our parents were much more vigilant about making sure that we were safe, needing us to call into home, making sure we had curfews, that they knew where we were all the time. And this has been hyper vigilant in the generation where you can track your kids. They have devices that follow them and you can monitor where they're going. And letting go of that is getting harder. So I don't know how much of this is really about, kids are online a lot because these things are super addictive. They are, but, let's hold on to this thought for a minute. But how much of it is because the rules around them, their days are now much more, they're spoken for, right? Between school, there's pressure to participate in extracurriculars, to do more. And then on top of that, you don't necessarily have the freedoms you had before. Or if you do, your friends might not, right? So where's the one space where you're all able to meet? It's online.
So everything that we've spoken about so far, then, Claire, is really about giving a sense of where children are in terms of their well-being.
Yeah.
Now, that then translates, doesn't it, into the kind of thing we've seen this week about the social media ban and why they're doing that. But there are other effects of that too, in terms of what they then want to consume.
Yeah. So I think all of those discussions are really focused on, well, what would make a happy kid, and a lot of opinions probably on what would make a happy kid, without actually asking kids what would make you happy. Although, maybe the fact that they've left connecting with their friends open is a good idea.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think is really interesting is in the last couple of months, there's been some research published. Internet Matters published a study into digital and online news and kids' well-being. Sorry, children and young people. I keep going kids, whatever, aged 11 to 17. And it looked specifically at their consumption of news, where they get it, how they get it, how it makes them feel, what they do about it, and makes different recommendations about it. I think the findings are really interesting. I think there's a bigger debate to be had about them. So Internet Matters are a nonprofit organization that is devoted to helping young people, parents, schools, help kids lead better lives online or, let's say, in the internet age, right? So they're not specifically focused on rectifying crime or rectifying the other sorts of harms that come to them, but actually more generally, like how their social and physical and well-being. So every year they do publish research into the digital habits and online life of children and young people. And one of the things that emerged this year was young people screaming news fatigue, right? So they did much more research into that and published that in the last month. And that research had some really interesting findings in it. So the first interesting finding I think that's worth talking about is that 76% of children and young people are exposed to news at least once a week. Right.
So they are. So effectively, 3/4 are getting
news,
weekly dose of news to some degree.
Yeah. And some are getting it even more frequently than that. So about a quarter are getting it at least a few times a week. Right. And one of the other interesting findings in that was that if you are getting news, if you're exposed to news, you're getting it from a number of different places. But the biggest source is online. And social media in particular.
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
Social media.
And that doesn't surprise me. So I've started doing some lecturing, at a university in the north of England here. And I'm teaching them journalism. So these are journalists, and they are, 18 or so. And they're all excellent and very interested and very intelligent kids.
Yeah.
And I asked them the other day, what's the lead story on the BBC website? What's the lead story on the Sky website?
Yeah.
Not a clue. No, absolutely not a clue. All their media, all their news pretty much comes from social media.
Yeah, I believe that. And one of the things, this is interesting. So quite a lot of their news also comes from TV, more than you would think. So the biggest source is social media for sure. But TV also it's in there, and especially if they're younger. So it drops off a little bit when they're 15 to 17, but less than you'd think. It's in the mix, right? So it does seem to be, if you are exposed to news in one part of your life, you're exposed to news in other parts of your life. I went to the launch event for this study as well, and they brought in a few of the young people who participated in the qualitative research on news. And a couple of them had said that if their parents have the radio on in the background at home, they get news from that, TV. So there's multiple sources of news in their life. A number of them talked about getting it in school as well. What they then went on to say, which I thought was probably more interesting, was that they actually didn't want to see news in social media. They have no desire to see it. And every time they saw it, they would check it, right? They would go, okay, because it's come from this influencer who's okay. And they're doing the job they need to do. But I don't know if I trust this. So they would go and try to verify it. They'd go to verify it through a traditional source of news. And then they would look into the sources of that. And if they felt that it provoked some interest in them in a story more deeply, they then might go into that rabbit hole. But they generally describe this feeling of exhaustion trying to verify things in case it then came up the next day at school or it came up among their friends and they had a way of talking about it. So there was a lot of standout things for me there. It was, one, media literacy is working exactly as it should, at least for those kids, right? And although this report says media literacy skills in school are a postcode lottery, they're getting it from somewhere. But the other was their absolute vigilance and also their awareness of the dynamics of social media algorithms, right? So they talked about an influencer they followed in particular and saying that, well, he has to make it. He has to sensationalize it. He has to say this in this really aggressive or outlandish way because how else is he going to get through the algorithm? So there's this awareness that that's what you have to do to be in that algorithm and to be in that space. And they are as skeptical as they should be, which explains this other finding in the report, which is that, this is great, 41% use traditional media sources, but 55% of them trust those media sources. So although they might not use them, they trust them a lot. Whereas 40% see news from influencers, but only 16% trust influencers for news.
I mean, at some point we should probably do a whole program on news and journalism and where people's attention is at in that and all of those things, not least because it's so far up my alley, it's ridiculous. But I
thought it was interesting that they'd gone, it
is fascinating. And I think it's fascinating not least because, these are, to me, the young people coming in should be the ones who are most engaged with news so they can learn what's going on.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me that they are the news fatigued when really they've not been through the experience that hard-bitten 20-year journalists like me have, who actually got an excuse for being knackered with news.
And they're certainly more sophisticated in their understanding of different viewpoints and standpoints and the motivations of, particularly of influencers in promoting different news stories, much more, I think, than our generation was. You had to have really sophisticated exposure to media literacy programs at our age, I think, in order to come away with that. And even then it was hard because most of our news came from traditional sources that really prioritized a neutral stance. We didn't, I'm trying to think who was you didn't have the Backstreet Boys turning up, screaming about, Gaza and 5G towers are going to give you cancer, right? There was none of that.
You didn't go to the right schools for that kind of thing.
Oh my God, my school was. Yeah, I went to a really good school. You'd think I was making it up. It was, I went to an international school that was basically just there were no rules, but it was also academic freedom.
I went to a comprehensive school in northern Lincolnshire. There weren't many rules there either, but that's a different matter. Anyway, look, I mean, it is interesting, and you're right, and there's so many different competing sources on people's interests. So generally then when children are turning away from news, are they turning to something else? Do we know what that is? I mean, is it gaming? Is it Roblox? Is it other sources?
So their argument, I think, and it's a good one, is that when they're on TikTok or Instagram or, wherever, they're not there for news. That really made me think, right? Because when we were growing up, I don't know about you, but we grew up in the era of lad mags and girl mags. And so we talked about being those weird kids who like news, but I was also, someone who saved my babysitting money diligently to buy imported copies of Sugar and J17 and 17 magazine. And I did not use those to find out about the news. That was what, at the time, the International Herald Tribune was for. Newspapers and the radio were for news, and Sugar and J17 and 17 was about Leonardo DiCaprio and how to be a better friend.
Yeah, so in that sense, nothing's really changed.
Yeah,
right? They're looking at TikTok instead of looking at Jackie magazine.
Exactly. That's my argument, right? And so I'm going news organizations, I think, are too caught up in, okay, how do we be there and make sure that we're in front of them? It's be in front of them in the places you should be, right? School is really important. That is still really important. I found it distressing to hear from a parent that their kids' schools had cut news round because it was, kids were distressed by news. So they wanted to make them less exposed. Well, news round is the one thing they should be exposed to.
I think that's absolutely mad. I mean,
Yeah.
By the way, I've always said to people, and I asked this very question in one of my lectures last week, which is the bit of broadcast media that is the best written? And in my opinion, it's newsround.
Absolutely.
Because you are having to explain incredibly difficult concepts to children, and your writing needs to be extraordinary for that.
Yeah, it's really, really hard. I think, so 2 best writing, 1 completely newsround, kids news, any like high quality children's journalism.
Yeah.
Very, very strong. The Sun.
Oh, yeah, no, completely.
Yeah. Making boring things interesting.
Same thing.
I'll never forget.
Same thing if you've got, it's a limited vocabulary. You've got to do everything quite simply, but you've got to explain concepts in a certain way. And I think that's absolutely, it's really crucial. But yeah, that's just that's the nature of it. And, the thing I loved about radio news was writing really concise scripts.
Yeah.
It was the thing I enjoyed most, really. So I think it's absolutely crucial. And I think children not being able to see stuff that's really well written, that's really understandable, is a problem. That said, in terms of their attention spans, is it just then that, media organizations, and I don't want to go on about this forever because we will do a journalism episode, but are media organizations just overly worrying that kids aren't watching stuff?
I think they see the amount coming into their feeds from social media. I think they see what that's made up of and then get over-focused on the fact that that's where news comes from. But I don't think anyone's asking the critical question to kids, which is, what do you regard as news? I don't think many people really have asked that question at any point, right? What is news? What does news mean to you, right? What do you regard as news?
So we have a very traditional sense of what the news is.
Yeah.
And yet.
Yeah. And yet, it's not really up to you that way. But trying to chase your way into that and compete against, Get Ready With Me and whatever the new viral dance is and, videos of animals being cute or very like squidgy.
If I don't mention 6'7" at this point, my nephew's going to go mad.
I just don't understand it. Right. I mean, I want to because it's funny.
We're not meant to. We're not meant to understand it. We're old, Claire. That's the point.
I think every day of my life that I'm not a teacher, because if I was a teacher, I'm sure I'd hate, or a parent, I'd hate 6'7", but I love how much it winds them up. So I'm like with the kids on this one, like, just keep doing it. 6'7".
Okay, so now we've explored all those viral memes and you've all gone off and done the dances.
6'7".
It's something like that. I don't know what it
it's
is.
Not even that, is it? Oh, God, the cringe.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Strangely, nobody under the age of about 40 is going to be watching this anyway, so I think we're fine. I was going to say, maybe we should just talk a little bit about those children who are fatigued and what that means for them and their lives. Yeah.
So I, maybe controversially, don't just think this is about news. I think this is in general, right? This is their fatigue in general. This is Jonathan Haidt's point. I think there are issues with some of the things that he raises, but I don't dispute what he's saying about kids feeling more anxious, more depressed. I think we've seen enough sort of cascading evidence of that. And it comes down to really, the way that they're leading their lives, and particularly, I think, on social media. And we have enough evidence to say that the algorithms prioritize sensationalist content. And that is content that provokes these extreme reactions, whether that's very, 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 very funny or whether that is shock and disgust. But one of the things that we also know is those extreme reactions are tiring. That's your body working. That's your brain working to process it. And constantly having to cycle through that in any form, not just on news, but just in general, is gonna leave you pretty tired and pretty exhausted. And there's no regulation for that at all. Right?
Well, so in that case, is this Australian regulation a good thing? If it just reduces the amount of content that children see, but it probably won't do that.
It'll make it harder, certainly, right? I think there's, can I talk about the porn thing? The Online Safety Act. So part of the implementation of that has been age gating. I'm not going to say all pornography sites because that's not the case. We know that it's an expanding list, let's say. It has increased the use of VPNs
Yeah,
So
this is
people,
in the UK.
in the UK,
yeah.
sorry, I should say, in the UK. So people use VPNs to get around that. This is always going to happen if you try to ban people's access to porn.
It's like getting alcohol during prohibition. People
Yeah.
will find a way to brew their
Find a
own
way.
moonshine, right? I mean,
Exactly.
it's just what happens.
But interestingly, I believe it was Pornhub came out and said their traffic was down by 75%. And, some of the sites that are actually much more regulated, much more careful, I think, about vetting their content. And because the scale of what they are, they have things in place to do that. They said, we're in danger of going out of business. And what you'll have left is totally unregulated, dark, do you want that world? And I think that's one potential thing that I think, not just if you're the UK, but if you're any other government looking at this Australian legislation, you'll be looking to stress test. Does this actually work, or has it created another imbalance in the attention economy that gets addressed by something else, right? Does it drive kids to platforms that you can't see them?
And just to bring this all back to control, I think one thing I find fascinating is the idea that we have more content, we have more stuff than ever before.
Yeah.
But yet, you could argue, I think, that our culture is far less permissive than it was in, say, the 90s or the 80s or earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
In lots of ways. I mean, there is stuff that you could get away with, rightly or wrongly, in the 90s that you can't say now on the radio.
That's really true. And some of it is self-censorship to a degree, right? So we do have a culture where we've prescribed certain debates. Or actually, I think people saying the algorithms are silencing me. Well, it's not really silencing you. It's actually that the algorithms are trying to keep people engaged. And what they've realized is that people are just more, you revert to the mean, right?
Yeah.
And the mean is not people who want to be engaged over here or engaged over here. It's vanilla.
Yeah.
It's the gap.
Everything has turned vanilla, right?
Everything's vanilla.
I think it's really interesting because when you get something that is even slightly out of the norm, people, I just know from my own experience of formatting radio programs, people are scared by a concept which is not the normal.
Yeah.
And I mean that on a kind of corporate level, really. It's anything that is even slightly different is kind of frowned upon, and that's maybe not good for the advancement of culture, I would say.
I agree. In the advertising sector, there's debate about this all the time, not just from a media and buying standpoint, but also from a, how do you market your brand standpoint? It's just less interesting, right? Our advertising, our brands, the way they position themselves is just less interesting. Yeah. There are fewer and fewer that are genuinely interesting, and it's hard to find new ones that are. And the ones that we think are, we latch onto like limpets onto a rock because we just don't see that level of, intensity, difference, challenge anymore that comes from brands. Even the brands that talk about themselves as being challengers aren't really that challenging. What are you challenging? If you're not making me stop and think and maybe feel something negative or positive or rethink something, what are you doing, right? You're just gravy. You're just go through the line. Sorry, that was a rant. But yeah, you're completely right. It's everywhere. But
it's a really interesting rant. And look, we are a podcast about the attention economy.
Yeah.
And I find it a fascinating thing that we are talking about the fact that everybody is overburdened with culture, but that culture has kind of got smaller over time. And that's crazy.
Oh, God, I'm thinking about the Axe effect. You definitely couldn't have the Axe effect today, but that was successful for a reason, right? And I don't think that instinct's gone away. I was talking to someone at Queen's University Belfast, Dr. Stephen Heron, who's done some really interesting research on radicalization of young men, both, let's say 20 years ago when it was radicalization of Islamist ideology versus today where we're looking at, the radicalization in the Andrew Tate form, although Andrew Tate's apparently cringe now. But, one of the things that he talked about was that all of those groups, one of their main ways of recruiting is by saying you'll be a man. And that man is someone who is able to rescue or help mute women. Right? Women need your help and real men stand up for that. Or, you'll get the girls. And that was fundamentally the Axe effect, right? That insight has not died. And it just goes on and gets co-opted by other more extreme organizations because we're too afraid to try to think about it critically, right? What does it mean?
Well, it'll be absolutely fascinating to see, I think, what the effect of this law is when it comes in. It's due start of December. That's
December
right,
10th, it comes into effect. Meta is going to start cutting accounts from December 4th.
Yeah, so it'll be really interesting to see what happens, and we will follow that here on the Attention Economy podcast. Can we have your attention? Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, James.